This is extremely good news for the Chicago Blackhawks as multiple NHL insiders reveal the plans for the Blackhawks heading into next season with key players going into their extension with Connor Bedard. We get an insight on him and goaltender Spencer Knight. Plus, the future of this team is lining up perfectly under Kyle Davidson. We're going to break down all this and so much more on the Blackhawks today. But before we get into that, if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button. We're just a couple away from reaching a goal of 18,000 subscribers. So if you're enjoying daily updates from the NHL, from the Chicago Blackhawks to the Vancouver Canucks, all the way to the Ottawa Senators, make sure to go hit that free subscribe button to stay up to date. But with that, Darius, let's just hop straight into it today, where we do know they're doing some tidy work this offseason. Now, we have reports on Spencer Knight and Connor Bedard. But before we get into that, we understand Frank Nazar signed to a contract that a lot of people might look at and say, hey, this is a lot for a guy playing under 60 games in the NHL. But tidy work with the cap raising, this is looking great. Now, with the extensions, it goes even further, where Elliot Freeman on 32 Thoughts spoke on Spencer Knight. I do believe Chicago is considering some other business, and one of the things I do wonder about is Spencer Knight. He's up after the season. Now, going into Spencer Knight, we know he's acquired a part of the Seth Jones trade, making $4.5 million. Darius, what is your overall thoughts on Spencer Knight going into his first full season with the Blackhawks?
Yeah, and his first, I guess, full season in the NHL per se. Obviously, he's had some stints with the Florida Panthers and then obviously traded last season to the Chicago Blackhawks. And he's always been a really highly sought after goaltender, highly touted goaltender. And now, he's putting it together at the NHL level with the Chicago Blackhawks. Obviously, we can talk about until we're blue in the face about the team in front of him. It's not a good team. Everyone knows that. And they're not going to be a great team next year. I don't think they're going to take a significant step forward. But some of his numbers are very encouraging. He's just below a 900 save percentage goaltender. And, the average in the league now, a lot of people tend to forget, is like a 900, 901 at this point, average around the league. So he's putting in some really, really good work with the Blackhawks. Obviously, before that, a above average goaltender, I would say. And I think that if they continue to build this team up, which we'll get into some of that later in the video and how that pertains to Connor Bedard, you have one of the best young goaltenders in the world on this team. I do believe that he is a great goalie. So again, you have him locked up for the last year here of his contract, $4.5 million. We can, talk about his contract projections and what he might make as well. Obviously, Scotia Stat Projections has him at taking a little bit less over 3 years. So that's going to be interesting to see. But again, I don't think a contract extension is necessarily imminent for this goaltender. They're going to ride out the year. Him and his agent probably have no interest in signing a contract extension now because it would have to be less and probably a shorter term deal. So we'll see how the season plays out, what numbers he puts up. But I'm thinking, if everything goes smooth sailing, even if the team's not that good and he's hovering around an average goaltending numbers, he's going to be paid pretty handsomely, I think, at this point, because he is a great goaltender, and we'll see what the Blackhawks do in front of him.
And I think that's the biggest thing. Still a very young goaltender. You can look at the stats he's had. A former 13th overall pick, Spencer Knight, has had so much surrounding him. But going in with a fresh slate with this young team where he can grow and develop is going to be a big thing. Now, the first thing looking at making 4.5, getting a demotion in price, if he does sign the projected salary of 3.2, it does make sense for the Blackhawks to give a bridge deal. Listen, we understand they went out and got Nazar on a long-term deal, but with Spencer Knight not really proving at the moment that he can play through the entire season, it does get interesting, especially when looking at what they have currently at goaltenders. Now, they're spending $10.5 million on 3 goaltenders right now, 2 young and a veteran. Darius, looking at this, do you think it's going to come in where we're going to see this team kind of put up a goalie battle? These guys are going to battle in camp. Someone is going to emerge as the starting goaltender. But would it shock you if they're going in with a 1A, 1B, and 1C goaltender next season, where whoever's the hottest hand gets the starts? And if you kind of fizzle off, the next guy is going to immediately step up and take that position.
Well, a lot of teams around the league are starting to do that. The Toronto Maple Leafs started to do that. And again, there's a couple other teams around the league that are starting to do that, to have one guy kind of waiting in the weeds that can play in the NHL. Not a guy who's, with your minor league team that would have to come up and play if called upon. No, a guy who is NHL ready. Although I think all three goaltenders here for, making $10 million is not ideal. Of course, they have the cap space to make it work. But once you start having to dish out money, which again, we'll get to in a second with Bedard and some of the other younger guys on the team, this is something that's not going to be able to continue. Obviously, UFA, RFA at the end of this year, Spencer Knight and Brossoit. But I think they have three solid goaltenders that can play at the NHL level. They're going to battle it out in camp. I would suspect that Spencer Knight's going to be the starting goaltender of this team unless something catastrophic happens. But Soderblom is a great goaltender as well. We'll see how he continues to progress. Obviously, you need a team in front of you to look good in this league or to even look serviceable sometimes. So have to take that into account. But I think they're going to ride it out for as long as they can. And then maybe even at the trade deadline, there's so many teams, injuries happen. There's so many teams that are looking for another goaltender. Maybe they're dangling Brossoit at the trade deadline and say, hey, we got a guy who has a ton of NHL experience, has shown that he can be a solid goaltender at the NHL level. Maybe they trade him for some assets in return. So I think it's fine heading into the season with three goaltenders. Obviously, you can't carry all three of them, so they'll have to figure out, who's going to go down, how that works out. Might lose somebody to waivers as well. But ultimately, if you can do it, why not do it? But I think at the end of the day, probably start looking at, what can we get for one of these guys at the trade deadline?
And I think that's the biggest thing. One of these guys will be Dangle. We've seen it last year where the San Jose Sharks moved on from Vincent Vanacek to the Florida Panthers for more than people expected, just to get some insurance going into a long playoffs that's going to be daunting on goaltenders and players. But what is your thoughts on this? We're going to get straight into Bedard, but do you think Spencer Knight comes in as the starting goaltender? Would you lock him up long term, or would you rather see a bridge deal so he can prove with this organization that he can be the 1A goaltender of the future? Let us know down below. But this goes straight into the second report on Connor Bedard, where Frank Cervelli on Bleacher Report said Connor Bedard was eligible to sign an extension on July 1st. Both player and the team are comfortable seeing how the third season plays out first. Now, the big thing with Connor Bedard, listen, a bit of a down year compared to his rookie season, putting up 67 points, 6 more points than the rookie season, but playing in all 82 games. I think there's a lot of disrespect around Connor Bedard, which is not warranted at all, as he is a generational talent, someone that's going to be the face of the league for the longest time. But Darius, do you find it interesting that Chicago and Connor Bedard seem to be going into the season where they're looking at it and saying, hey, show us that you can progress and we'll give you an extension? But if Connor Bedard goes out to put up insane numbers and breaking any of his previous records, I could see Chicago looking at this and saying, hey, maybe we should have paid him before he did this.
Yeah, you can look at it from both sides, but I think ultimately I'm not surprised by this. And I think that it's probably smart for both parties, because I think there's a real possibility things go south here and he could end up being traded. I'll get to that in a second, but obviously needs a new contract extension. Like you mentioned, had a down year compared to his first year. A lot of players do, right? It's the sophomore slump. We talk about it a lot. I'm not too worried about that. I would suspect that he's going to have a better year this year. And it happens to so many players around the league and so many really good generational talent, even it happens to. So wouldn't put too much stock into that. Of course, if things are still on the down this year, that could be a recipe for disaster. But I think with the contract looming, I think the team wants to see how this plays out to see if he is a generational talent, right? And then they'll give him a contract that they think is worth it. I think for the team, obviously, if things go well, you want to give him an 8-year contract extension, because this is the last year you can do that with the rights, right? So things are about to change. The max you can go when, having the players' rights would be 7 years after this year. So you want to lock him up to that money. Obviously, it's going to cost a lot of money, the term, and it's going to cost a lot of money. But from the players' side of things, and I think this is where things get interesting, and if you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan, let us know how you feel in the comments. But just from what I'm seeing, this is a player that I think wants to ride out this season to see if the team is going to take a step forward. I think the Chicago Blackhawks and Kyle Davidson, he's done a good job of stripping it down, just like Kyle Dubas does in Pittsburgh and Toronto. But then when building it back up, hasn't really shown anything, right? And I think that they've added Foligno, but I think they've really failed to insulate a lot of their younger talent with any substance and any guys that can actually make a difference, make an impact. So, Connor Bedard is coming into his third season and he's going to be playing alongside some younger players and Ryan Donato, right? I just don't think that's a recipe for success at this point. I could see why he might be disgruntled and maybe want to leave the Chicago Blackhawks if this season doesn't go well again, or if they don't look like they're at least taking a step forward. On paper, to me, I don't know how you feel, Mark, it does not look like they're going to take a step forward, and they're only getting younger and more inexperienced. We've seen it around the league. This is not NHL 25 GM mode, right? You can't just rebuild, bring in a bunch of young players, hope it works out because of all the skill and the talent. This is the NHL. It doesn't work like that. So I think they failed to insulate him with some impact players, some players who can play at a high level and contribute at a high level at the NHL level. He just doesn't have anyone around him. So it's very difficult to put up points. You can argue, guys like Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, if he was on that level, then he should be producing and being able to play with anybody. Maybe that is true, but as a team, I don't see them finding any success as a team, not just him and his line mates who's playing with him. So we'll see. I think that could get very interesting this year if he doesn't take a step forward in terms of point production again. And if the team doesn't look like they're taking a step forward, I wonder if there comes a situation where he's like, I don't know if I want to resign here.
And I think the big thing is this season's going to be big. Listen, the Chicago Blackhawks are not going to go out to win a Stanley Cup with the current core, and that is completely fine. You're in a rebuild, adding talent into this roster, but even looking at social media, you see it. Canucks fans constantly talking about it. BC native Connor Bedard, hanging out with Celebrini, future Canucks at some point maybe. But this is a big season for Kyle Davidson and everyone within the core, as this is going to decide on how they value people. We've seen Nazar, they value this. Spencer Knight, maybe it's a bridge deal, but the Connor Bedard contract, I think, is going to be the major turning point. If you get him on a contract that walks him in to being a UFA, you start to panic. If he signs an 8-year extension, you feel a lot better. But fans, what is your thoughts on this? What is your thoughts on the current team going into next season? How long do you think Bedard signs for? How long do you think they get Spencer Knight? Let us know down in the comments. While you're down there, leave a like, subscribe, share this with your friends. Once again, we're trying to reach our goal of 18,000 subscribers. So if you made it this far, go down and hit that free subscribe button. But that'd be it for this episode. I've been your host, Mark, with my co-host, Darius, and take care.